So we've connected and the presentation is on now. Just before starting the presentation, I just want to kind of indicate that TERI has been organizing similar webinars in the past and we have had very good response from the participants. So in our endeavor to kind of pass on whatever knowledge we are gaining through our research projects within the institute, we are aiming that we are able to also pass on some of the issues and our understanding related to the challenges of urban transport, specifically in India. And this webinar we are holding in the context of Earth Day. And so I would want to begin with just starting to introduce Earth Day and also its theme for 2014. So Earth Day, a lot of us are aware, every year April 22nd marks the anniversary of what many consider the birth of the modern environmental movement in 1970. About 1 billion people in 190 countries come together primarily for the cause of environment. This year's theme of Earth Day is Green City, and the kind of why this theme was chosen can be tracked back to 2013 when the Earth Day Network launched the Green Cities campaign, essentially to help the cities around the world become more sustainable and reduce their carbon footprint. The aim of this campaign essentially is to help cities accelerate their transition to a cleaner, healthier, and more economically viable future through several interventions that are environmentally benign. This whole campaign of Green Cities by the Earth Day Network focuses on buildings, energy, and transportation. So to begin with, as we've introduced in our webinar, I really want to focus on this whole concept, a new concept of green growth. We've been hearing terms like sustainable development, low carbon growth, and this is essentially a new term which a lot of us are coming across. This is this whole concept of green growth. And in that context, the concept of green cities. Well, green does not mean just planting trees or developing parks. In fact, in some conferences that I attend, people even ask us that, is painting buildings green or painting cities green is what is called green growth. Well, it is not. Green growth essentially is a concept that focuses on promoting economic development which minimizes the environmental impacts of such development. So it's a concept that takes together development and growth along with environment friendliness. The focus essentially is that the cities should grow and their productivity should increase, which calls for increases in public and private investments and consumption. But at the same time, the focus is also on reducing the environmental impact, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, minimizing wasteful use of natural resources, reducing the vulnerability to climate change, and very importantly, incorporating social equity concerns, which a lot of times get neglected in our quest to go for high economic growth. So the green growth concept really tells us that we need to take all this together, because this whole paradigm is essentially, it's not that either green or growth or development or nature or environment. It's really that we have to take all this together and move forward, because the long-term sustainability essentially depends on how we are able to develop and have an economic growth that is taking care of our environment. So when I bring this concept to the cities, what it essentially does is that it really translates the whole concept into two issues, which is that if I translate the green growth concept in cities, what it is doing is that it is generating demand, increasing the demand for environmental quality of life, and at the same time, it is increasing and generating demand for products and services that reduce pressures on the environment. And these products and services are essentially what we contribute to the economy. We will talk about these more when I come to the transport part. So in this context, green cities can be very simply defined as cities that promote economic development that is sustainable in the long term, and looks beyond just these short-term economic or environmental gains that may be there. Because the current approach that is there currently is that we look at very short-term gains, whether it is economic development, whether it is solving the current problems, the day-to-day problems. Our vision is not long-term in that sense. So Green Cities concept really is about looking at cities that have long-term growth and long-term sustainability. So why promote green growth in cities? That's essentially because we are urbanizing at a very fast pace. Currently, as you can see in the map, about half of the world is urban. In the next 4 decades, we expect that whatever population growth that happens globally would be absorbed by the urban areas in the country globally. And major part of this population with urban growth will take place in the developing world. So it's even more important to look at this issue of green growth of cities because we will have more and more concentration of population living in cities. A lot of these cities are not prepared for this kind of population challenge. In fact, this also gives us an opportunity. In this growing urbanization, it's both an opportunity and challenge for us. Opportunity because as you have more and more people agglomerating, coming together, there is more growth, there is more development, knowledge economies, for example, growth. A lot of development happens, but at the same time, there are challenges of environmental degradation, decreasing quality of life, etc. And we need to balance the two as planners, as managers, as government, as citizens. And this is where we bring in the concept of green growth. And as I said earlier, there are 3 key elements of green growth that we focus upon, which is buildings, energy, and transport. Transport essentially is the focus of today's presentation. So going on to transport, what is really the role of transport? Transport sector essentially is contributing to the country's or a city's economy and its growth. It provides mobility, both for the passenger and for goods movement. It also enhances livelihood options for the population because I can access a job place where I want to work by having faster modes of transport. But at the same time, when I am traveling, or the way we travel has several costs to the society, to the environment, and to the economy. These costs create distortions which then result in negative impact, negative externalities. And these distortions in the way we produce the cost on the society, economy, and environment need to be addressed if we have to really realize the vision of green growth that we are talking about. So let's begin with the current transport situation in cities. Though my presentation would now on focus more on transport situation in Indian cities, I guess a lot of participants who have joined from developing countries would be able to relate to a lot of these issues. So currently in the context of Indian cities, this is a typical picture of any Indian city, a road in any large Indian city today, where we have congestion, we have parking problems, we often take our cars, our two-wheelers out, but we don't find parking spaces. There is air pollution. There are accidents. One of the major problems that we are yet to realize is the way it is harming our population. There is noise pollution, again something that has very harmful impact on health. And all of this is leading to transport systems in our cities that are inefficient and causing physical environmental degradation and reducing our productivity. Because the way the amount of time we spend on travel is also a critical component in enhancing or reducing our productivity as individuals, as cities, as nations. A key cause for this, which I would consider is important to discuss about, is motorization. I'll come on this issue later in the slides as well. And while we're talking about the situation of transport in our cities, we also need to understand that it's really not it's just not limited to what we see on our roads today. it is spread across the life cycle of any transport project. As a transport project, from the time they are conceived and get started to be constructed, there are impacts on environment and quality of life. For example, the construction of transport projects, there are impacts. We see this a lot of times happening around us, construction of roads, new roads, flyovers, underpasses, widening of roads. Then we have the construction of public transport infrastructure. So all of this is happening around us and causing impact on the vegetation, on the landform, on the quality of life, because people are getting disturbed, people are getting dislocated to other locations because of transport infrastructure construction. Even at the stage of transport operations, as I stated in the earlier slide, there are several impacts related to pollution, emissions, public health. And there are other issues which cannot be neglected either, which are essentially linked to the issue of equity, the social concerns, because if we are giving an opportunity to people for traveling, it has to be an equal opportunity. It doesn't have to be an opportunity that is just limited to those who are on motorized vehicles. And as you can see in the pictures, we have people, essentially the pedestrians and cyclists, who are squeezed, who are struggling to cross the road or use the road, which essentially is indicating that specifically, at least I can talk about the Indian cities, our focus is really on car-centric growth and not on growth of transport that meets the need of all, the pedestrians, cyclists, disabled, women, elderly, car users, two-wheelers. So we have to plan systems in our cities that meet the needs of all and are equitable. And linked to this issue, as you can see again in this picture, is that there is a lost opportunity here, because there is a demand for transport, people want to travel, but the conditions in which they travel aren't really comfortable. So it's very important that we again create systems that are convenient, comfortable, and it's just not that these kind of attributes are associated only with private transport, but with all forms of transport that people may choose to use. So now coming on to, as I said earlier, the key issue linked to this is the whole issue of motorization. And that's why I pose this question, that why is that the current situation of transport in our cities is like this, and why is that we are witnessing the current trend? And I would link it to one key issue, which is growth in the personal vehicles, which has been unprecedented, and our cities were not prepared for this kind of growth. And when I say that, I don't mean that they should have planned or constructed more and more roads, flyovers, etc. I mean that they should have visualized and envision the kind of demand for transport that would be there in the next 10 to 15 years. Because we have failed to realize that long-term demand. Today, people who do not have other choices have opted for cars, two-wheelers as their main mode of transport. And this is reflected very much in this graph that you see in front of you. The vehicles that were added since independence to 2000 versus the vehicles that have been added, the private vehicles that have been added just in the last 10 years in India, I mean, that is more than what we added in 50 years since independence. So that shows the magnitude of problem, that this is something which is unprecedented, and we have not envisioned this, we have not kind of predicted this, and that's why we are caught in this kind of situation. And a lot of this growth that is happening is concentrated in our large cities. Linked to this, I'm now going to a polling question for all of you, just to keep you involved in this discussion. So I would want you to now respond to our question, which would be appearing on your screen. Do you think that car ownership in Indian cities like Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai and Hyderabad is lower than car ownership in Singapore and Hong Kong? I've got the poll result also. Well, I'll first announce the poll results, then I'll go to my slide. A lot of us believe that yes, the car ownership in Indian cities is lower. In fact, In fact, about 20% of us feel that it is lower, and about, interestingly, 50% feel that it is higher. And that is, I'm really glad to know that you all think the way I think and what my data says. Interestingly, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side of your screen, the car ownership in Indian cities, look at Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, and Hyderabad, those orange dots, and the right axis is far higher than the car ownership in Singapore and Hong Kong, which, by the way, has far very high GDP per capita as compared to our city. So this whole issue that car ownership is linked to the economic growth level of a city or a country kind of gets this kind of concept or preconceived notion gets busted. So, we are at far lower economic growth level, GDP or income per capita level in our cities like Delhi, Bangalore, but we have far more number of cars and an area of concern for all of us. And in fact, a lot of us, when we talk about India as a country having very low car ownership, it's very important for us to look at these concentrated zones of car ownership, which is these large cities in our country. And if you look at the left-hand side graph, what you will see is that the topmost line, 12% growth in increase in the number of new registration of cars versus, in fact, if you could see some of those lines below, we have cities like Hyderabad which are growing at a rate of about 20%. In terms of every year's new car registration being added. And at the same time, we have Singapore and Hong Kong around 3 to 4%. I have another question for all of you, because that's linked to our next fact that I'm going to present to all of you. How many of you, according to you, how many cities in India have formal public transport systems? So while I wait for the poll result to come to me, I'll just move on to the next slide. And in fact, I will tell you that out of these 500 big cities which are above 0.1 million population, we hardly have 25 cities which have some sort of formal public transport system. And in fact, again, I'm glad that my data is matching with what a lot of you see. So 45% of you have said that about 25 cities in India have public transport systems. About 30% of you have said that about 25 to 50 cities have public transport systems. And some of you have also said that about 15% of you have said that all cities have public transport systems, which I would want to correct, which is not true and which is in fact an area of concern for us. And that brings back me to the question I was posing earlier, the issue I was posing earlier, that because we have not recognized or predicted the kind of transport demand that would have taken place in the future, which is now, we have not planned for that transport demand. And people would need that transport demand in any way, and that is why we see this surge in growth in number of private vehicles, specifically two-wheelers in our cities. And if you can look at my slide again, what you would see is that public transport share in our cities has been declining, and while we have seen the increase in the personal transport use, the share of public transport has declined from about 60 to 80% in 90s to about 35 to 55% in 2007. And the public mode of transport clearly constitutes 2 to 3% of the entire vehicular fleet in our city. About 70% is two-wheelers, about 10 to 15% is cars, and barely 2 to 3% is public transport mode. And while our public transport mode share is declining, the non-motorized transport share is also declining because we have not provided adequate infrastructure for the use of non-motorized transport, pedestrians, cyclists, cycle rickshaws, etc. Here's another question for all of you, because I'm going to touch upon another very important critical issue which is linked to transport, which is road safety. So I just want to pose another question and ask you all, where do you think India stands globally in terms of the total number of deaths due to road accidents, do you think India ranks number 1, or it ranks somewhere among top 5 countries, among top 20 countries, or among the last 10 countries? So where do you think India stands globally in terms of the total number of deaths due to road accidents? Nearly 400 people are dying every day due to road accidents in India. And this is a really sorry state of affairs because this has been growing. And if you see, we have actually taken the lead over China. China some years back used to be the highest in this category in terms of, China held the first distinction of being the highest, having highest number of deaths due to road accidents. And we have overtaken them. And in fact, what China has done is that it has been able to reduce its road accident deaths, and at the same time, we have seen a consistent growth in the number of road traffic accident deaths. And above this, the number I'm presenting to you, 0.13 million deaths in the last year, and there are about 5 million injuries only, which are not accounted in this number, which again has a far more bearing impact on the lives of those families whose members get affected in road accidents. So this is a huge negative externality of transport systems of today. And another bad distinction that I would say that should not make us proud is that most large Indian cities are in the list of top 100 most polluted cities in the world. And vehicular pollution, transport, is a key contributor to this vehicular pollution. And if I look at the results, about only 10% of you said that India ranks 1 in road accident deaths globally. About 50% of you said that we rank among top 5. So the rest said that we are among top 20 in last 10. So, I have touched upon, and deliberately wanted to touch upon the issue in much greater depth, because sometimes it's useful to listen to the same problem again and again, because then maybe there will be a thinking that, we have to move forward to address this problem. But now I'm moving to the part of solution and going to answer some of the questions that you may have in your mind. That given the current trends of this motorization, declining public transport, what is the most optimal solution for that? I have one simple answer for that, which is that we need to promote sustainable modes of transport, we need to promote sustainable mobility. So would sustainable transport systems really promote green growth concept or green growth in cities that we were talking about? Well, yes, because the provision, the planning of sustainable transport systems in cities would lead to both the improvement in quality of life, and at the same time, it will also enhance demand for products and services that reduce pressures on the environment. So it's minimizing the environmental impact, it is leading to cleaner air, less congestion, less noise pollution, and at the same time promoting technologies, promoting systems that can contribute to the economic growth. And the focus again is that the sustainable transport system will lead to long-term sustainability, which is essentially the basic requirement of the green growth concept. So the question then is that how can we promote sustainable mobility in our city? In fact, it can be done in many ways, and these are some of them. We need to improve access to transport for all. And when I say access, it means availability, it means the quality, it means the convenience of a transport system for all. It is not just for those who have cars or two-wheelers parked in their garages, but it is for a person who wants to walk, for a person who wants to use a bus. We have to improve access, the quality of transport for all. And at the same time, we need to minimize the need to travel. We need to close the mobility divide, minimize environmental pollution created by transport systems, promote energy efficiency, involve all stakeholders in this initiative, and establish institutional structures and funding arrangements that can support all of this. This kind of gives away very critical sustainable mobility parameters that are very essential if we are talking about planning for cities, planning transport systems for cities, conceiving projects, transport projects for cities, which is that whatever plans that we make, whatever projects that we choose, we need to take care of these three key sustainable mobility parameters: equity and accessibility, safety and security, environment friendliness, and low carbon intensive nature. Access and equity, as I said earlier, it's not just about just a service being available or a system being available. It implies physical access, that a system is available to me, it is adequate, has highest quality in terms of comfort, convenience, reliability, etc. And at the same time, it is inclusive in terms of being financially accessible as well, which implies that it is affordable any mode of transport that I want to choose, say public transport, it is affordable too. So the access and equity concept invites both the concept of physical access of transport systems and financial access to it. Safety and security essentially is that we design systems, we develop projects or conceive projects that reduce road accidents and improve road safety. And at the same time, projects that ensure security. Again, safety and security are two different concepts. When we're talking about safety, we're talking about accidents. And we're talking about security, we're talking about security in terms of crime. So again, we see and we come across the incidents, the maximum number of harassment cases for women happen on public roads or in public transport. So there is a role for transport, a very critical role of the way our transport systems are planned to ensure that the security of the vulnerable population, women, disabled, elderly, is ensured in our transport system. And this is easy to do. I'm not talking about things that are not doable. Simple steps like appropriate lighting, creating lively streets, not removing hawkers from streets, because they are the ones who can keep a watch on the road, creating safety features in our public transport system. These simple things can actually transform our transport systems from the perspective of security of these vulnerable commuter categories. And very importantly, never to be missed, environment friendliness and low energy use of transport systems. The focus has to be whatever system we want people to use. The end objective is that the fossil energy consumption should reduce, the noise, other kind of pollution should reduce. And by essentially fossil fuel consumption should reduce, I just want to kind of highlight some facts. India is largely an oil importing country. About 80% of our oil requirements are being imported. This will increase to about 9% in the next 10 to 15 years. So we can't afford to use a scarce resource for our country. And so we have to go in for transport modes that have the least energy footprint and in turn also the least carbon footprint. And again, these things are not difficult to do. We need to promote mass transport for this. We need to promote non-motorized transport. We need to look into our urban planning and create cities that are again compact. And several of these measures, traffic demand management measures, for example, parking is one key issue. And I have to look at the way I can kind of control the demand for transport. Then I need to look into using clean fuels and efficient rate movement as well. So how can cities imbibe all these sustainable mobility parameters that I just talked about in a holistic and comprehensive manner? From my point of view, it is very critical that the cities imbibe these mobility indicators through their city mobility plans, because these plans set out a vision for future growth of transport systems in our cities. So it's very critical that we look into and evaluate the city mobility plans that are there for our cities from the perspective of whether they promote three sustainable mobility indicators or not. And it's very essential because CMPs, the mobility plan, will be the tools to guide the future growth of transport in cities and funding of transport projects. So whatever we are going to see in terms of developing in our cities, in terms of the new projects, transport projects, new roads, new infrastructure in transport that we will see, will essentially be in a way evolving from what the long-term vision set out in the mobility plan set out. So it's very important that a mobility plan of the city concentrates and looks into these and promotes these sustainable mobility parameters: access, equity, safety, security, and environment readiness. And now I'm even becoming more specific to India. So mobility plans are being prepared in India, and there is a background to that. In 2006, the Government of India, the Ministry of Urban Development, announced the National Urban Transport Policy. The focus was on promoting a lot of sustainable mobility parameters, indicators that I talked about. And as many of you would know, the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission was launched also around the same time, in fact a year earlier than the National Urban Transport Policy. So after the policy was announced, the mission, the National Urban Renewal Mission, made it conditional upon cities to come up with comprehensive mobility plans, which are consistent with the National Urban Transport Policy. As of now, there are more than 50 cities which have drawn up their CMPs. In fact, there could be even more, now maybe 60, which have drawn up their mobility plans. So it's very important, as I said earlier, that these mobility plans essentially promote the goal of sustainable transport. But currently, CMP preparation in our country, in our cities, is essentially a technical process, which usually neglects the kind of things that we talked about. So our hypothesis in TERI, when we went out to evaluate these mobility plans, was that cities may adopt, yes, a technically sound approach, but this may not necessarily promote sustainable mobility that we just talked about. So we looked into CMPs of 5 cities to evaluate our hypothesis. And we focused on understanding whether CMPs, the mobility plans, promote sustainable mobility. We tried to look into the question that are right kinds of projects being identified in the plans to ensure implementation of sustainable mobility strategies, and does the fund allocation for projects prioritize projects that are really sustainable. This is a very simple overview of our framework. We looked into the process of preparation of CMP, the technical process, the consultative process, the contents of the CMP, how it promoted sustainable mobility parameters, and we also looked into evaluating the implementation mechanism proposed in the mobility. We've looked into 5 CMPs: Surat, Kochi, Jaipur, Kolkata, Pune. We did this analysis some time back, but it still holds true because none of these CMPs have been revised after that, and they stand the way they are. And they set out a vision which is 15 to 20 years vision for a city. So whatever they have said in the plan will be realized the way it is. And these are just some facts about these CMPs. But the only point I want to highlight through this slide is that the cities that we have chosen range across different sizes of cities. So we have looked into a city with a 1 million kind of a population versus a city with about more than 13 million population. So I'm coming to the analysis and the findings of our analysis. I'll very quickly cover this. The whole focus is that I kind of pass on the knowledge that we gained during this review. So we found some very common gaps appearing in all the plans, be it their planning process or their plan content. In the planning process, there was inadequate stakeholder engagement, specifically with regard to involving the public, the NGOs, and also a lot of times if one agency, say a municipal corporation, is preparing a plan, or times it was not involving the other key agencies which are responsible for transport sector. And essentially, what we found is that the mobility plans of these cities were kind of standalone documents with no linkages to the other plans like the master plan or city development plan. Then there were other gaps with regard to non-motorized transport in terms of the kind of recommendations that were made. Very few plans have made recommendations on provision of supporting facilities for MNC users. Lack of recommendations on integration of hoppers in formal sectors in NNT and road proposals. No suggestions on establishing cells that in municipalities or development authorities that can look into this issue. None of the plans that we reviewed suggested any measure to improve security of the transport system users. Most of the plans ignored promotion of universal accessibility. There was lack of proposal on running differential transit services that can meet the needs of different kind of commuters, different kind of public transport commuters. So there were lack of proposals on improving the quality of services, improving accessibility of public transport terminals, and lack of measures to promote integration of ITC with public transport. With regard to environment, I mean, very few CMPs that we looked at had any recommendation. I mean, very few recommendations, and in fact, the overall lagged recommendations on improving environmental quality from the perspective of transport. There was lack of clear strategy to implement the proposed transit-oriented design, though a lot of them did talk about the concept and said that it should be developed, but in isolation from the master plan, which really is focusing on the land use plan. And also freight transport, a very critical component in urban transport, was in a way neglected. The freight proposals were essentially limited to construction of bypasses, shifting of economic activities to city territory, but not beyond that. There were hardly any proposals on traffic demand management, lack of any policy on how to manage parking. It was really a supply-side solution that we have seen in most of these plans. People are not really using parking as a demand management tool. The lack of innovative solutions to restrain transport demand, and with regard to implementation, very weak implementation strategy, lack of well-defined framework of targets and performance indicators, etc. So at this point, given that I have introduced you to sustainable mobility parameters, I have introduced you to the essentials of a sustainable mobility plan, and I've also introduced you to the kind of analysis and our findings of review of these 5 CMPs. I have another question coming for you. It is a very simple question. Whosoever, I mean, if you are aware of the kind of comprehensive mobility plans that are being prepared for different cities in India, do you think that they are in line with the sustainable mobility parameters that we just talked about? Interesting insight into what do you feel your cities or the cities that you are aware of are doing with their mobility plans. Is it just a technical document that talks about complex modeling exercises and future traffic growth and future projects? Or is it much more beyond that, and it looks into these very critical social and environmental linkages of transport? So we've got the results. Interestingly, again, it's about 60% of you feel that the cities in India, the mobility plans that are being drawn up, do not promote the sustainable mobility parameters that we talked about. About 20% of you feel that they do promote the sustainable mobility parameters, and about 20% of you did not also. So I would say that majority of us feel, and I also believe that because I've looked into a lot of these CMPs and what cities are doing, that I also believe that they are not promoting sustainable mobility parameters. And it's very important, though they may be doing some things in isolation. So I may be doing a small project which may be called a sustainable urban transport project, but that's not the way to go ahead. So we have to look at the holistic picture. We have to look at the long-term sustainability of the overall transport system in the city. So how should we improve our mobility plans? We need a very robust guidance framework for CMP preparation, and I would call it a framework for sustainable urban mobility plan that includes all these mobility parameters and follows a very ideal plan preparation process that is participatory, which has ownership by citizens. It includes social and environmental considerations and technical approach. And it should be a strategic plan that is designed to satisfy the mobility needs of people and businesses in cities and their surroundings for a better quality of life. And it builds on the existing planning practices and takes due consideration of integration, participation, evaluation, and sustainability principles. And it should be a plan that promotes sustainability intentionally. It should not be forcing sustainability, but promoting it intentionally, and it should therefore have a different approach as compared to conventional planning processes, which means that it should not be reactive to problems, which is that it should not be reacting to demand and just augmenting supply or following the problem-solving approach, but it should be a proactive plan for the city. It should envision a future, shape up the demand, and develop strategies to realize that vision and meet the needs of all. These are some of the elements that this kind of urban mobility plan framework should adopt. We have talked about most of these earlier. And the approach essentially, as I said earlier, has to be participatory, involving all the key stakeholders. It has to be integrated. The implementation has to have some measurable targets, and there has to be accountability. And we need to account wider societal costs and benefits. And this would require an implementation framework that is a robust institutional framework. And if we look at the current status, our national policy in urban transport encourages establishment of unified metropolitan transport authorities, UMTAs. However, the operationalization of UMTAs has faced several problems in our cities, both in terms of empowerment of these authorities and their relationship with different agencies in the city. So these issues need to be addressed. Secondly, we need to lay down a clear implementation strategy with timelines, targets, and prioritization to be able to move ahead in a productive manner. And it's very important while we are talking about this concept that we encourage our medium-sized cities specifically to prepare sustainable urban mobility plans, because right now there are just a few large cities that have prepared their mobility plans. So it's very important to encourage and incentivize cities with more than 0.5 million population at least to draw up their mobility goals. So now that we have touched upon the planning issues, which are very specific to cities, now we move on very quickly to other issues related to green transport. Because from the green group perspective, it is also critical to understand the transport sector's energy and greenhouse gas emission threats. And we had done these kind of calculations within TERI, and what we found is that the city transport systems contribute significantly to the share of energy consumption, about 40%, and CO2 emissions, about 25%, in the total onboard transport energy and CO2 emissions in the country. And which means that it's very important to look into just a few large agglomerations of population, which is these cities, in terms of addressing the issue of energy and GHGs. So how do we reduce energy consumption and GHGs from transport? As we discussed, planning interventions that we just talked about, integrated land use, promotion of public transport, non-motorized transport, all would be very critical, but technology interventions will also be essential. These are in terms of cleaner fuels, cleaner vehicle technologies, intelligent traffic technologies, virtual commuting, and also regulating vehicles through standards, emission norms, and inspection and maintenance routines. And just to very quickly provide you an overview of what is India doing with regard to these technology interventions. We have introduced emission norms. We have the auto fuel policy of 2002. In the country, we have Bharat Stage 3 and 4 norms currently. And there is a new committee that is looking into Bharat Stage 4 fully being implemented across the country, and then Bharat Stage 5 coming in the future. We recently had the fuel efficiency standards for cars being announced by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. What they would do is that the manufacturers would have to comply with these standards and would have to meet average fuel efficiency standard targets. Then also, in the country, we have seen complete deregulation of pricing of all transport fuels. This is important because this can affect the transport demand. We talked about minimizing transport demand earlier. So it could affect the transport demand in the long term. So the petrol prices in India have been completely deregulated since 2010, and diesel is being deregulated in stages. And we are at the same time moving to cleaner technology. In 2013, the government released the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan with the ambitious vision for 5 to 7 million electric vehicles, focuses on all kinds of electric vehicles. So given that I'm actually just few minutes left for the webinar, I'm just summarizing the whole discussion. That transport in green cities, what needs to be done? We need to arrest the fast pace of motorization that is happening. We need to increase the share of public transport and non-motorized transport. We need to promote integrated land use transport, energy-efficient road-based movement, encourage virtual commuting, use of intelligent transport solutions, etc., all of that we talked about. We need to set targets for reduction in energy consumption and CO2 emissions. We need to identify and strategize interventions that can help achieve this. We need to establish appropriate institutional, regulatory, and fiscal frameworks and establish protocols for measuring and monitoring progress. And for all this, we need robust city plans, institutional structures, capacity enhancement in our cities, enabling regulatory mechanisms. Very importantly, we need political will, public engagement, and above all, also financial reform. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I would really thank all of you for being very patient and listening to us.